what does the United States government do in the United States and elsewhere? It moves in and facilitates resource extraction and maximizes production at the expense of communities. I saw this great bumper sticker quite a while ago that said, U.S. out of North America. And so to think about, I want to read just a little page and a half thing about government of occupation, which is, and I think it's really important for us. So many indigenous people have said to me that the most important thing that we have to do is to decolonize our hearts and minds. And part of that has to do with separating ourselves from them, to recognize that there is an enemy. And, so often, we can talk about how, we talk about the government in terms of we or our government. But the first thing we have to do is to separate ourselves and recognize it's not our government, it's their government. If it were a democracy, it would be our government, but it's not. And it's like this friend of mine called me up and said, so how much longer do you think we're going to be in Afghanistan? I was like, we're in Afghanistan? I thought we were in Northern California. My friend said, how much longer do you think we're going to have troops in Afghanistan? I said, I got troops? Holy shit, will they do what I tell them? If I tell them to take out the Grand Coulee, will they do it? She said, yeah, this is why I only call you once every 6 weeks. Or my mom, just not very long ago, my mom said, it's just so terrible. It breaks my heart that we torture. I said, Mom, you torture? Oh my God, that's terrible. And my mom said, you're my son. I'm too old for this. Cut it out. Anyway, if Nazis or other fascists took over North America, what would we all do? We'd watch television, by gum. What would we do if they implemented Mussolini's definition of fascism? Fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it's a merger of state and corporate power. And what would we do if they instituted laws allowing them to put a significant portion, say 1/3, of all Jewish males from the ages of 18 and 35 into concentration camps? What if this occupied country called itself a democracy, but most everyone understood elections to be shams, with citizens allowed to choose between different wings of the same fascist party? It's like when I was a teenager, I was a little right-wing fanatic when I was a teenager. When I was 19, this is the most embarrassing thing I did in my life. When I was 19, I voted for Ronald Reagan. If he would have won by one vote, I would have killed myself. Anyway, when I was a teenager, I used to think it was so fun to laugh at the Soviet Union because, their Politburo is made up of 99% Communist Party members. They call themselves a democracy, but it's like, okay, what percent of the Senate and House of Representatives are members of the Capitalist Party? Anyway, what if anti-government activity was opposed by stormtroopers and secret police? Would you fight back? If there already existed a resistance movement, would you join it? Substitute the word African American for Jewish and ask yourself the same questions. Between about 35%, 1/3 of all African American males between the ages of 18 and 35 are under so-called criminal justice supervision. Some communities like Baltimore, it's over 50%. Anyway, would you resist if the fascists irradiated the countryside, poisoned food supplies, and made rivers unfit for swimming and so filthy you wouldn't even dream of drinking from them anymore? What if they did this because, hell, I can't finish the sentence because no matter how I try, I can't come up with a motivation good enough even for fascists to irradiate and toxify the landscape and water supplies? If fascists systematically deforested the continent, would you join an underground army of resistance, head to the forests, and from there to boardrooms and the halls of the Reichstag to pick off the occupying deforesters, and most especially those who give them the marching orders? Okay. So maybe your sense of kin, your sense of skin doesn't extend to the natural world. Maybe you don't yet love the land where you live enough that you'd fight for it. But what if the fascists toxify not only the landscape but the bodies of those you love? What if their actions put dioxin and dozens of other carcinogens in the flesh of your mother, lover, children, mother, brother, sister, father? Would you fight back? What if the fascists toxify your own body? What if aliens came down from outer space and they were systematically deforesting the planet, and they were vacuuming the oceans, putting dioxin in every mother's breast milk, and they were changing the climate? What would we do if they were space aliens who were doing all this? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd grab my camo outfit, grab my AK-47, head off to the... Wrong audience again. So am I the only person here with an AK-47? You have an AK-47? That's cool. What?
This this is Northwest Indiana. We all got guns.
That's great. I was sharing the stage with Ward Churchill one time, and I said that question, am I the only person here with an AK-47? Whole audience is silent, and then I hear this one voice go, nope. And then I did a talk in Western Pennsylvania where I asked the same question. I said, am I the only person here with an AK-47? Like half the audience raised their hands. And two people in the audience got in this big argument over whether, what is it, AK-47s are, what, SK? What's the?
They're either Russian made or they're Chinese made.
Yeah, so is SK the other one?
SKS.
SKS, yeah. So the two people in the audience got in this argument. They just interrupted my talk, and I just sat back, the guy like fucking got an AK-47. I'm not going to argue with them. So I just sat back. Well, they argued whether AK-47 or SKS is better, and it's like I don't really know what this means in terms of whether I actually want to be in Pennsylvania when it all comes down, or whether I don't. It's anyway. So the point is that what if the fascists or the space aliens or whomever toxified your own body? Would you still cling to the illusion that their edicts carry more weight than that brought to bear by their secret and not so secret police? Would you work for this regime? Would you teach others its virtues, or would you fight back? If you won't fight back when they toxify your own body, when precisely will you fight back? Give me, and more importantly yourself, a specific threshold at which you finally take a stand. If you can or won't give the threshold, why not? None of these questions are rhetorical. The questions are real. They are, at this point, some of the most important questions there are. So I think, so I have something I want to say to everyone in this room who is less than 45, which is cherish your memory. Because when you hit 45, it goes straight to hell. I've done this talk so many times before, and it's like after government occupation comes, what does it mean to fight back? Culture of resistance, Olympia. What the hell? Why would I talk about Olympia? It's a town in Washington. So Olympia. Hell if I know. Yeah, about 45 you get this pretty terrible disease. It's called CRS. It's a CRS syndrome, and it means can't remember shit. It's like I have this friend. I was complaining about my memory to this one friend of mine, who then said back to me, "It's like, don't even talk to me about it, because I will routinely find myself standing in the middle of the living room, holding a can opener in one hand and a plastic bag in the other, wondering why I'm standing there." This is your future. Anyway, we will jump forward to somewhere where I actually do know what I'm talking about. Which is, I want to jump to the last premise I want to talk about, is that the 15th premise of the book is that love does not imply pacifism. And one of the reasons that I wrote Endgame is because for years I had done talks about capital F fighting back. And the response by audiences was really predictable, which is a lot of sort of mainstream peace and social justice activists and mainstream environmentalists would, as I'm talking about fighting back, they would put up what I've taken to calling a Gandhi shield, which is that they would say the names Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Dalai Lama again and again as fast as they can to keep all evil thoughts at bay. And grassroots environmentalists would do the same thing, except afterwards they would come up to me and they would say, "Thank you so much for bringing this up." And then other groups had entirely different responses. And these would be a lot of people of color, especially American Indians, a lot of the very poor, gang kids, a lot of radical environmentalists, survivors of domestic violence, dare I say prisoners, that would look at me as if to say, "Why don't you tell us something we don't know? Let's go, bro." And it took me a little while to figure out why there was a difference in that response. And I finally realized that the difference in response is that for the former groups, violence is an abstract spiritual question to be puzzled through. And for the latter groups, it's not. It's something that you have experienced in your own body. And It's not abstract. It's not spiritual. It's not theoretical. Sure, it's spiritual, as everything is spiritual, but it's not theoretical, and it's something you deal with. Doesn't mean you participate, and it doesn't mean you don't, but you don't turn it into something it's not. You don't reify it. You don't turn it into capital V violence. You just deal with it. It's like, I was talking to a pacifist one time who said, I got to back up a second and say, my definition of violence is any act that causes harm to another. And I really like this because it shows the ubiquity of violence. This pacifist called me up one time and she was saying, I'm against all forms of violence. I said, my God, how do you defecate? Because every time you defecate, you kill bazillions of bacteria. And she, like Queen Victoria, was also not amused. And so what I'm really interested in is what forms of violence we personally and socially find acceptable or not acceptable. Clearly, socially, we, as a culture, find murdering the planet acceptable. And one of the ways I put this is I say, okay, most of us under most circumstances would find it acceptable to do an act of violence to a carrot. And a carrot has a life that's just as valuable to it as yours is to you and mine is to me. Most of us under most circumstances would find it acceptable to do an act of violence to a carrot. Most of us under most circumstances would not find it acceptable to do an act of violence to a human being. And so I'm really interested in where we draw those lines, personally and socially. And I said this to a pacifist one time. It was so horrible. I was doing this interview with a pacifist. God help me. I do not always make good decisions. Anyway, I gave this pacifist an interview, and I said that to him about the carrot and the human being. And he said to me, so what you're telling me is that there's no difference between a human being and a carrot? It's like, well, no, actually, it's not what I'm telling you, but thank you for playing. So anyway, when I would talk about fighting back, the audience responses from the pacifists were so stereotypical that what I wanted to do is just write out answers to some of their most common complaints, and then I would write a little pamphlet, and then when they would say, you can't use your master's tools to dismantle the master's house, I would say, here's a pamphlet, go away. And this pamphlet became a 1,000-page book for reasons you can probably understand after having sat here tonight. And so I want to go through a couple of the cliches that they talk about. One of them is that they would say, you know, really the solution to all of our problems is love. And if you just loved enough, you could never talk about fighting back. Because what we really need to do is to love CEOs. Because if we love them, then something good will happen somehow. And if you loved enough, you could never talk about fighting back. I disagree. I think Mother Grizzly Bears will back me up on this one. I think that if you don't defend those you love, then what does love mean? I grew up in the country, and in my life, I have been attacked by mother horses, cows, dogs, cats, chickens, ducks, geese, hawks, eagles, spiders, and mice who thought I was attacking their babies. And if a mother mouse will take on someone 6,000 times her size and win, what the hell's wrong with us? I don't believe that love implies pacifism. So that's one. Another one that they throw out all the time is they say, you know, you talk about us and them, and you talk about an enemy, and don't you realize that if you point a finger at somebody, that actually you have 3 fingers kind of pointing back at you and 1 thumb up in the air. And so don't you realize that talking about us and them is really dualistic? And that's just terrible. And so my response to that is, oh, okay, so just to be clear, what you're saying is that dualism is bad and non-dualism is good. Checkmate.